This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Howdy partner, and welcome to Feature History, featuring the Texas Revolution, a time back when the US liked illegal border crossing. Edgy humor aside, that time was back in the early 19th century. The area today known as Texas was a part of Mexico. The US had yet adopted Manifest Destiny, and the frontier was very much alive. Today things are different. No shit, but this video is going to delve into how much change the Texas Revolution made, just how revolutionary it was. But I won't spoil you and start our story there. We're starting with European colonization. Roll the slide. Europe first began colonizing the continent of America in the 15th century. Unless you count the Norse, but I'm not going to. Colonization would not be a walk in the park. The British, French, and Spanish all found themselves struggling against the natives, the elements, and each other in their attempts to colonize the New World. Deep within this New World was Texas. Spain and France would both claim the region, but the French would be the first to settle it in the 17th century. But then everyone died, so the fertile plains of Texas were untapped. Spain would follow up the French attempt and, through much struggle and even more stubbornness, saw limited success by the 18th century. Settled, yes, but it was the least populated area of New Spain, with between only a few hundred to a few thousand settlers. After the 7 Years' War, France would relinquish its claim to Texas and French Louisiana to Spain. But then in 1799, Spain gave Louisiana back, and then in 1803, the United States bought it. Now, was Texas included in these deals? Maybe, maybe not. There was disagreement as to actually how far these borders went, and so a line had to be drawn. With the US's purchase of Louisiana, the young nation doubled in size. The Republic now shared an extensive land border with the British and Spanish empires. Relations with them weren't great. The US's kick-started expansion and growing population led to the idea of Manifest Destiny, well, manifesting. Early proponents of the idea envisioned a continent united under their republic, a republic that stretched from sea to shining sea, a republic that didn't share with the old European powers. Spain felt the pressure from the US, especially given the discrepancies in the Louisiana Purchase. The US believed itself entitled to lands as far as the Rio Grande, and soon Spain's territory was being infringed upon by American filibusters. That isn't filibuster in a political sense, but a military one. Filibusters were armed men that took to the frontier to seize land from nations that the US was technically at peace with. But all this was a very minor problem compared to what happened in 1808, as back in Europe, Spain was invaded by Napoleon, and after that, much of New Spain began to push, and even fight for independence. Mexico would break out in revolt and quickly descend into chaos. During this conflict, a Mexican-American filibuster expedition would claim Texas, declaring it as the independent Green Flag Republic, but Spanish forces would soon offer the rebels no quarter and tear down that flag. Texas was firmly in Spain's hands. However, in this rapidly deteriorating situation, Spain sought compromise and agreed to define a common border with the US. It would not surrender Texas, instead, it would cede Florida in the Transcontinental Treaty signed February 1819. Stability was finally achieved between Spain and the US, but Spain wouldn't stick around. The empire's colony fell apart and gave way to many independent Latin republics. Under the Constitution of 1824, Texas now belonged to the Federal Republic of Mexico. As the dust settled on Mexico, the threat of filibustering persisted, and so the new government under the presidency of Guadalupe Victoria sought to address the issue with the General Colonization Law of 1824. It would introduce the EMPRESARIOS system that sought to turn American filibusters into Mexican citizens. Empresarios, on the behalf of the Mexican government, would be recruited to sell Texan land to immigrants at low prices, and the empresarios themselves were paid in land. The population of Texas, which had sat at 3,500, exploded as the empresarios established their settlements all over. The many new immigrants to Texas, or TEXIANS as they became known, quickly outnumbered TEJANOS, Mexican-born residents. These immigrants were offered their citizenship as long as they learned Spanish and converted to Catholicism. But it was very typical they didn't. In fact, even with promoted immigration, many Texians were illegal. America wouldn't be sending its best either. Many of those flooding Texas were outcasts. Even the most famous Texians had their foibles. Jim Bowie was a violent frontiersman, Sam Houston a disgraced politician, William Travis an indebted lawyer, and even Davy Crockett arrived to Texas off the tail end of a disappointing political career. But as it turned out, even with all its flaws, the Mexican government was now finally turning a profit off Texas, the new frontier. A turning point would however arise in 1826, when the impresario Hayden Edwards declared his settlement independent. Other impresarios were having none of it. They didn't wish to ruin a good thing, so Edwards' rebellion would be put down with ease, but now impresarios were starting to get a bad rap. Things only got worse. In 1829, the Mexican government abolished slavery. Many Texians were slave owners and bordered on revolt until the Mexican government allowed them some exceptions. So clearly, Texas was trouble. And so the US twice offered to take it off Mexico's hands, to which President Victoria declined. Twice. Victoria ended his term in March 1829, and after him Mexico suffered a myriad of coups and rebellions, usually as a result of conflict between those desiring a strong centralized Mexico or a federal republic similar to that of the US. During this time of flux, it was decided within the government Texians had to be stopped. The laws of April 6, 1830 were introduced, banning any further American immigration and raising import tariffs. Texas was pissed. But jumping back for a moment, the aforementioned flux of power would finally settle in 1833, when the soldier and politician Antonio López de Santa Anna was elected president. He won his election off his support for federalism, and then in 1834 completely swapped sides when he ordered the disarmament of all civic militias, dissolved Congress, and in 1835 repealed the Mexican Constitution. Santa Anna was a dictator. Much of Mexico would openly rebel against him, and he was ruthless in his suppression. In May of 1835 he would crush the militia in Zacatecas and allow his army to pillage, loot, and rape for 2 days. He gained his reputation quickly, and soon Texians were not very fond of him. Military commanders in Texas feared Texians joining the revolts, and so, maybe counterintuitively, began to crack down. In September 1835, the military was ordered to retake a cannon they had given to the militia in Gonzales. When the residents of Gonzales learned of the Mexican military's intentions, they had only one response. When Mexican forces arrived in Gonzales, they found the militia armed with firearms, the cannon, and a banner that read, "Come and take it." Significantly outnumbered, the soldiers were routed with one shot of the cannon, one shot that won the battle, one shot that started the revolution. After this, the Texians would quickly hurry to assemble a provisional government, and it was decided Sam Houston would lead as Major General of the new Texian army. That army would be responsible for running the Mexican garrison out of Texas, and with their series of victorious skirmishes they were able to recruit many more Texians, TEJANOS, and volunteers from the US and even Europe. In its lifetime, the army would amass almost 4,000 troops. Even with that, it was dwarfed by the might of the Mexican Republic. Santa Anna would take personal command of an army of 6,500 men to quickly and decisively crush the revolt. With limited time before the Mexican army's arrival, the Texians began to entrench. Colonel Jim Bowie, Colonel William Travis, and the frontiersman Davy Crockett would set up their men at an old Spanish mission turned military base, the Alamo. Major General Houston was well aware the Alamo couldn't hold out against a siege, but Bowie reckoned to allow the fort's capture would be detrimental, and so the Alamo remained garrisoned. Santa Anna and 1,800 experienced soldiers met the Alamo in late February 1836. The defenders numbered only a couple hundred, and Santa Anna made his intentions clear when he rose a red flag against the fort. He would offer no quarter. The siege began immediately with a constant barrage of artillery fire. Jim Bowie would be bedridden with disease, and so command in this trying time was left in the hands of young William Travis. Travis would smuggle letter after letter urging for reinforcements, but there was little in the way of response. On March 2nd, in Washington on Brazos, the Republic of Texas would formally declare its independence. But on March 6th, back at the Alamo, the walls would be stormed. With both an advantage in numbers and experience, the Mexican army soon broke through the defenses. Travis died almost instantly, Jim Bowie would be shot dead in his bed, and David Crockett captured and executed. Survivors were few and far between. The Alamo was a slaughter. Santa Anna had learned this way of war back when he was a lieutenant fighting the Green Flag Republic, and he believed it would work again, that it would crush Texas. Santa Anna's terror continued. In the very same month, 425 prisoners were rounded up after the Battle of Gilead and massacred, piled up, and burned. Santa Anna believed this way of war would crush the Texian spirit, but instead the now Commander-in-Chief, Sam Houston, used these losses to uplift it. With the cry of "Remember the Alamo, remember Gilead," he managed to amass many men to join the cause of the revolution, even as it seemed to be in its death throes. Mexican forces continued to move further and further into Texas as the population fled from it. It was very much a time of retreat for the Texians, and so the Mexicans became accustomed to little resistance. On the 21st of April, that Mexican army was suddenly ambushed. Sam Houston surprised Santa Anna's forces with roughly 900 men of his own, and in a battle that lasted only 18 minutes, he was able to rout the Mexican forces. That rout turned into a full-blown retreat. Many Mexican soldiers would attempt to surrender to the Texians to no avail. Repeating the battle cry, "Remember the Alamo, remember Gilead," the Texians took to murder. 650 Mexicans died compared to only 11 Texians. Santa Anna himself was found hiding in the marsh and was captured by the Texian army, and as much as they wanted to execute him, it was far more advantageous to have the President of the Mexican Republic as their prisoner. The remainder of the Mexican forces dared not to move from the Texians while they held Santa Anna, and so the President entered negotiations. For 3 weeks he was held and made to sign off the treaties of Velasco on May 14, 1836. The Mexican army would withdraw south of the Rio Grande and respect the border, but keep in mind, not actually recognize it. After signing this, Santa Anna would safely sail off back to Mexico City. With one decisive victory, the Texian army had achieved the unlikely. They had won their independence, but what was even more unlikely was them being able to keep it. Before the end of the war, the provisional government had convened and drawn up a constitution for their nation, one that almost copy and pasted the US Constitution, just with more revolt and slavery sprinkled in. It was clear that the leaders of the Republic wished to join the Union. However, annexation isn't just said and done. Mexico didn't recognize Texas as independent, and much of the US was torn on whether to actually annex the country. So Texas, the Lone Star Republic, existed in limbo for almost a decade. Sam Houston served as president for the Republic until in 1845, the United States would officially annex the 28th state of Texas. Of course, Mexico didn't like that, but that's a story for another time. As it stood, American expansion had just begun. The seeds of the Union's problems had been planted, and an era of US dominance just beginning. However, it must be said that this episode of history contains a lot more than I had time to go over, or that I even could go over. History isn't just a story of war and politics, but also of concepts like math, science, and physics. Now, admittedly, I've never been the strongest in these fields, but with Brilliant, the tools to learn these ideas have never been more accessible. The website and app allows you to learn unfamiliar math and science skills, apply them yourself, and, with enough time, eventually master them. A great and diverse education is something everyone should strive for, and with Brilliant, you can. To try it out for yourself, head over to brilliant.org/featurehistory and sign up for free. The first 200 people to do so will also be eligible for 20% off an annual premium subscription to the service. This is the end card where I thank the patrons and am obligated to especially thank Thomas Curley, Harry Berkeley, Anal Scrubs, Ermia Rez, and Skylar Hagler. The next video should, I'm going to say should because I can never confirm anything, be out later this month and will be another studio one. That means my acne face again. So, until then, adios amigos.